Good morning and welcome everybody to our joint webinar today, where we're pleased to have Vested who join us today talking about the Great Resignation and how share option schemes can be the answer. So before we begin, I'd like to introduce ourselves and our guest speaker today and run through some housekeeping to help in the running of the webinar. For those who are regulars to our webinars, and you'll know me from those, I'm Victoria Templeton, one of the HR Knowledge Managers for HR Solutions. And like my usual webinars, I'm going to be handing over the reins to our guest speaker today, Ifty Nasir, the founder and CEO of the company Vested. And I'm going to be leaving Ifty to introduce himself shortly, and when he begins to talk about Vested and share options. And as with our usual webinars, we're joined by Sue Watson, who will field the questions and help with the polls throughout today's webinar. And we also in the background have Drew Nagis, who will be on hand to help us should any of us encounter any technical challenges, but fingers crossed all will go straightforward. Because we have so many of you who have joined us today, we've placed you all on mute. However, we do, as always, like to hear your questions. So we'll be taking questions at the end. So please do let us know of any that you have by noting them in the question box that's available to you. So here's a quick guide just to show you how you do that. So you'll have a GoToWebinar panel on your screen that should look something like this. Please type your question in the question pane, and then we'll aim to read out and answer as many as we can at the end. We also want to make the session as interactive as we would normally do if we were having a face-to-face discussion. So when we have a poll, then a slide will appear on your screen as it's showing now, and you select the right answer that's appropriate for you. Just please note that in order to be able to participate in the polls, then you will need to ensure that your screen is not in full screen mode, as for some reason GoToWebinar doesn't operate when it's in the full screen mode, unfortunately. So what I wanted to do is just run through what we're going to cover today, and before I hand over to Ifty, then I want to spend just a few moments just to put some context from a HR perspective around the Great Resignation and some of the challenges and why employee retention is key. But our main discussion, as I've said, is about how share option schemes can be the answer to tackling employee retention. So we're pleased to be joined today by Ifty to help us all understand more about share options and to take all your questions. So do submit your questions, as I've said, and we'll answer as many as we can at the end. And so without further ado, let us move on to just first of all understand the Great Resignation and employee retention from a HR perspective. And before we go into that, we're going to run a few short polls. So if I could ask Sue to run the first 3 polls, and just to get an idea as to the situation with yourselves. So over to the first poll. And it should be showing on your screen.
Yeah, that's showing, are you experiencing recruitment challenges? So there's a simple yes or no at this point in time. Just let that run in a few seconds.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll close that poll and share the results with you.
Okay.
There we go. So 63% yes, 38% no.
Wow, interesting. Probably no surprise as well.
Absolutely. It's across the board. We've got a lot of queries through the team about recruiting and ourselves. We are still trying to recruit. So
63% is very high percentage. So yeah, hopefully what we find out today, hopefully that will help in overcoming some of those recruitment challenges. And so we have a second poll as well. So
just launch that one now.
The next one is whether you've got concerns around the number of people leaving your business.
Okay, I'll close that poll now and share the results. So there we got 57% yes.
Yeah, it's still high. I mean, it's generally more split, isn't it, equally? But there's still a significant 57% people are concerned with people leaving their organisation.
And then we'll do the final poll here, which is
do you have either a recruitment or employee retention strategy in place? The results are interesting coming through.
Okay, let's close that one. Share those results.
Interesting. At one point it was 50-50.
It was for quite a while, wasn't it?
So yeah, so actually again, 57% of you don't have any particular strategy in place to tackle recruitment challenges or, you know, employee retention. So that's interesting. And I guess as we come on to talk about some of the challenges, hopefully it might just get you thinking about actually what kind of what do we need to focus on, do we need to have a strategy in place, and actually when we come on to understand share and share options, see how that may filter into your recruitment and retention strategy.
And also those who've already got one, whether they need to review it in view of the current climate that we're in, what we've just been through and what we're kind of tackling going forward as a result of that. So yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Sue.
I'll hand that over back to you.
Lovely. So before I hand over, I just want to run through the Great Resignation and employee retention. So, you know, we keep hearing this phrase, and it's, you know, really important to understand what do we mean by this phrase. Well, it's a term that's used to describe record numbers of people leaving their employment. It came about really from 2021 on the back of the pandemic, and we'll hear more later from Ifty on this, but we know that the pandemic has led employees to rethinking their careers, their working conditions, what they're looking for from a place of work, as well as generally their long-term goals from an economic and psychological perspective. So all of this combined has led to mass people leaving en masse, should I say. So it is a really, really critical time for employers, especially as we're trying to respond and move forward from the pandemic. But we are also seeing other challenges too. So not only are employees struggling to hold on to their staff, but they're finding it difficult to recruit due to having fewer candidates in the job market. You know, from those polls, you know, a lot of you are having challenges with recruiting. And we are seeing the number of vacancies outweigh the number of people searching for employment. So it is very difficult for employers at the moment. We've also seen changes to our immigration rules. That's impacted in particular certain sectors such as the health and social care sector, as well as hospitality sectors. They've been in particular hit the hardest. And so with all these challenges, it is forcing employees to think about their employee retention strategies, because good employee retention does lead to highly motivated and engaged workforce, which ultimately is going to lead to that business success. But why and how does it lead to business success? So we do know that good employee retention is key, because it's going to lower your recruitment costs. It's going to bring you stability to your business because of your continued workforce. It's going to allow you to build specific knowledge, expertise and experience that's relevant to your business. And of course, it increases staff loyalty. You'll also find that it will lead to a highly skilled workforce, and therefore improving on and creating positive customer relations for you, as well as leading to better brand reputation. But it also creates deeper connections amongst your staff and working together. And of course, you'll see fewer transitions between employees and you won't see as many employment gaps in your workforce. But how can share and share options help? Well, this brings me a good point to hand over to Ifty Nasir. And before I do, I'm going to run a very quick poll. And if I could ask you, Sue, just to quickly launch the poll. And it's really just to find out from you about how familiar you are with share and share option schemes. And so we've got some possible answers for you to select. So it may be that you're completely not familiar at all with them. You may have a little bit of knowledge, or you may be very familiar with them. So just out of interest, it'd be really good to hear from your perspective what your understanding is of share and share option schemes.
Okay, I think that's probably...
Oh, that's right, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, at one point, again, it was 50-50, wasn't it?
Yeah, and literally until the very last moment there. 50. So, but yeah, it's definitely need and an interest, by the sound of it, from our lovely listeners today.
Lovely. So yeah, 63% have little knowledge, 38% are not familiar at all. So that's really good. Thank you very much for answering that. So, and it brings me a good point to introduce you to Ifty Nasir, who's here today, as I say, to talk about share and shop options. So I'm going to hand over the controls to Ifty, and we should get going with the webinar. So over to you. I think you should have the ability to take control. Perfect.
Okay, let's see if I can actually move the slides along, otherwise we'll be asking for assistance. Yeah,
you did I'm a second ago.
So I'm going to ask you to move them along, if that's.
You want me to take it back? Yeah.
So we'll do a bit of a
so here we go.
Thanks.
So has that moved on? Yeah.
That's moved on way too far. Okay, that's fine. We'll take it from here. That's great. So, The Great Resignation sounds like a Charles Dickens novel, but actually it's not fiction at all. It's very real right now. So, as Victoria mentioned, my name is Ifty Nasir. I'm both founder and CEO of Vested, which is a UK-based platform for setting up, managing and running both share schemes and managing your equity for SMEs. The whole reason for setting it up was based on the notion of the ownership effect and a great belief that people having a stake in the enterprises that they work for makes a big difference to what they bring to the table. And I'll go into more detail on that in just a few minutes. But if we can have the next slide, please. There are indeed lots of facts around this notion of the Great Resignation. As we saw earlier with the polls, it's not something that's just amongst the people who are here. This is a worldwide phenomenon. There's a whole pile of things, post-pandemic, lots of millennials and Zoomers getting older, millennials coming into the work environment with different mindsets. There's a big change, and I think it's going to drive lots of behavioral changes, not just from individuals, but for companies. Next slide, please. So, as I say, this is not just notion, it's fact. The Evening Standard has come out with the fact that more resignations since 2009. 2009, as you'll recall, was the peak of the financial crisis. Lots of companies going under, people having difficulties, needing to move to cover the bases. So that was a big time horizon for that resignation period. We're now getting to those levels and potentially beyond. When you take that into effect, Oxford Analytic Economics and others have provided information that shows, and I'm sure most of you guys in HR will already know this as well, that it costs as much, if not more, to get a new member of the team than their salary for the ones that are leaving. So there's a huge cost impact here when people do leave. So retaining them is a massive incentive. It's just inherently economically sensible to try and retain them. Move on to the next slide. And obviously the solution from our perspective, or one of the solutions in the mix, has to be around how you share equity with your team. Next slide. So what is equity? Equity is literally a business has, every commercial business has shares. The founders and other owners have a piece of the pie if they hold any of those shares, otherwise known as equity. There are various ways of looking at this, but if you think about as a pie, and I'm going to mix my metaphors because later we'll be looking at trees and fruit. But if you think about the whole notion of sharing something that is a tangible asset within the business, it's a piece of sharing with other people what they are contributing to. Okay, there are a number of different share schemes and option schemes that you can use in the UK, and we'll go into the detail on each of them. But before we do that, if we just look at the ownership effect now in the next slide, and just give you a little bit more of an understanding of this. So the ownership effect is some research that was initially kicked off about 40 years ago at Stanford University, and the research proved, and it has been subsequently built upon, that if somebody has a stake in an enterprise, however small that stake is, their relationship with the enterprise changes. Emotionally, psychologically, what they bring to the table changes, and it can make a massive difference to the business. Because businesses are built on very fragile differences between success and failure. A little bit of magic can take you over that curve and take you on to success, and losing that can hold you back. It's like the R factor on COVID, but the other way around. So if you can access a little bit of magic through the ownership effect, changing the way people turn up for work, that psychological change, that emotional change, you should try and access it. Because what it then brings, as the next slide will show, is a big change in motivation, in terms of alignment of teams, because everybody is aligned to the success of the enterprise rather than a personal individual bonus or a sub-team bonus. It's about the success of the enterprise that people are focused on, because the higher that share price or that option value, the greater people are going to feel connected to the enterprise as well. Obviously, with share schemes, it's not just about the giving. The giving is important, but doing it in the right way makes a big difference too. And as we'll see, there are ways that are more tax advantaged or beneficial than others. So let's look now at the ways of sharing equity. And the most popular use cases are these. So let's look at the left-hand side first. Shares, be they ordinary or be they preference shares. Shares, as I mentioned earlier, just a portion of your enterprise. Ordinary shares, often used by to distribute shares between founders, early investors, and maybe even early team members. Okay. Pref shares, usually those that are deployed when you have more sophisticated angel investors coming in, or venture capitalists, VCs, or private equity. Pref shares give the holder of those preference shares additional rights, generally in relation to the voting. So they may be able to veto things that the business wants to go to do, or their approval has to be sought to let's say hire senior hires or whatever. And the other piece of preference advantage is often in relation to the value or the distribution of value from the business, if there's a liquidation or if there is a sale of the business. Pref shares will generally have first call on any cash, and then sometimes even participate in what's left pro rata to what they have. But today is more around rewarding those people who don't bring cash, who bring their endeavor. Because if I were to give, let's say, for instance, somebody who has been part of the team or an advisor, an ordinary share, and if that ordinary share has a tangible value, which most businesses do, then the person would end up having to pay tax on receipt of that share. So let's say the ordinary share is worth £1. I give a share to one of the team members. When they receive that, they'll have to pay income tax at their marginal tax rate on it. So 40 to 45% typically will be what they'd have to pay in tax just to receive that £1 share. And as we all know, shares sometimes go down as well as up. So paying tax on something that may not be liquid or that could go either way is not usually something that folk want to do. So when you are rewarding people who are bringing things other than cash, you want to use something either like an option or a growth share. So let's look at options. An option is literally the opportunity to buy a share at some point in the future, often based on some delivery or contribution to the business at some point in the future at some pre-agreed price. Okay. Now options can be very different in nature, although people often think of them as a single thing. They are quite different. So there are two main types. Those that are approved by HMRC, so they have a nice tax wrapper around them. The most common of those for SMEs is EMI, Enterprise Management Incentive, which is a scheme, a tool that can be deployed for companies with up to 250 people, employees, and net assets at less than 30 million. There are other constraints around being able to use EMI. It's only available, as I say, to employees, but we can give you more details on those now. You're not going to remember anything that I say in relation to more on that in terms of the generals, but I'll come into a little bit more of the net back or cash consequence of an EMI versus an unapproved option, i.e. an ordinary option or one that doesn't have any tax benefits aligned to them. Let's just to the next slide. I'll just show you the difference between these. Although people think that that's the same, they're very, very different. So an EMI, Enterprise Management Incentive, let's say the share price today is £1, and let's say 5 years from now, the shares get to £10. And the person who has received the EMI therefore sees a gain of £9. And because it is subject only to the entrepreneur's relief level of tax, they will only pay 90p in tax. So they will walk away, when those shares are transacted, they'll walk away with a net £8.10 in their pocket. The other big tax benefit of an EMI scheme is that the company can offset the whole of that £9 against corporation tax as well. So that's fantastic. So the £1 that they set the option price at or the exercise price at, they get back, and then the £9 that they've essentially given to the or shared with the team member, they get to offset that against corporation tax. So it's a brilliant scheme. It was devised by Gordon Brown when he was Chancellor, and obviously several Conservative governments have held on to this scheme because it's a brilliant scheme. It incentivizes the right thing. You know, the notion that if you have shares in the business, you'll bring more. So on a portfolio basis, you know, the Treasury believe that if we give this incentive both to the recipient and the company, we'll end up with better businesses on a portfolio basis, and so we'll get more tax. So it's good for us to incentivize them. But if you're not eligible as a business for EMI, or the individual is not eligible because they're not an employee with a certain number of hours in the business, then the alternative route of giving somebody a stake in the business is what's known as an unapproved option. So none of the tax benefits. So here, the same story. The person gets an option exercise price at £1, goes to £10, £9 growth. Now, when the person exercises that option, they'll have to pay their marginal tax rate on that reward. So on £9 of growth, they'll pay the £3.60 at 40% or £4.05 at 45%. So the net receipt is, you know, £4.95, as little as £4.95. The other downside of an unapproved option is there's no ability to offset the growth against corporation tax. So going back to the whole notion that, you know, people think of option pools as just options, it's very important to make sure that you get the best one for you and the individual, because the difference between a 10% tax and a 40 and 45% tax are quite material. Okay, so if you go back to the next slide. So obviously options are the most common used reward for those people who are not deploying or buying the shares. An alternate route is a growth share. Now, unlike an option, which is just the right or the opportunity for a right to buy shares at some point in the future, a growth share is a real share that's issued, but it's issued with what's known as a hurdle. And the hurdle is today's price plus a small premium known as a hope premium. So let's say if we use the same example of a share, the current share price being £1, and the hurdle will be set at £1.20. So unless the share grows to being worth more than £1.20, the person who receives it gets nothing. So when they receive that growth share, they're getting no value. It's underwater on day one. So there's no tax liability for the person receiving it. And the existing shareholders are never diluted of even a penny of their value. In fact, they're not going to be diluted until the shares get past £1.20. And only then do they share the growth that has come from this person who they're issuing the growth share to, and not diluting any of their own previous value that they'd created in the business. So growth share gives the person who's receiving this the opportunity to get the growth in the value from the time that they join, and it's essentially going to be a capital gains tax. So at the moment that's 20%, because there's no guarantee that the share price will actually get any higher. So from a tax perspective, it's not a guaranteed income. Any growth that comes is a capital gain, so subject only to 20% tax. So often these growth shares are a little bit more complex to set up, are often a little bit more expensive to set up as well. But on vested, just an aide-memoire, it makes no difference. Any of these tools that you want to use, we can deploy all of them, and there's no difference in cost. But the reason why it's not used is because it is more expensive and more complex in terms of the articles changes that you may need to make to get it done. But we will do all that for you if you choose to use growth shares. So EMI 10% tax for the recipient, unapproved options 40 to 45% typically, and growth shares typically 20%. Okay, so they're the different types of equity that you can deploy. If we can move forward. In terms of how do you take this forward, obviously, as I mentioned, normally when people are setting up schemes, they'll go to their lawyer or their accountant. But if you think about an EMI as an example, you know, there are some 3,000 to 4,000 put together each year. And if you think about that being spread across all the accountants and all the lawyers in the country, you can see that they're not going to be doing too many of them themselves. So that knowledge and experience is very limited for us. You know, we do hundreds. You know, we've got thousands of people on the platform, so we do hundreds, several hundreds each year. So we do this as our bread and butter. This is day in, day out what we do. And what we do is allow you to do from the whole notion of deciding to do a share scheme, all the board shareholder authorizations and approvals, the valuation, the HMRC approval, the Val 231s that go with that, and setting up the schemes and keeping them compliant is from start to finish what we do. And we know that what we provide is best-in-class service at the most amazing of prices. I'll let you go to the website vested.com to see how much it costs, but you can get a share scheme up and running from as little as £150 a month. Okay, and being regulated, we're FCA authorized and regulated, which we're very proud of. It means that we cannot entrap you, nor would I ever want to entrap anybody on the platform, but it means that you're able to leave the platform when you feel that you're not getting any further value. and you can download everything that we've done for you, because we want you to be safe and sound with whatever we have done. But one of the other beautiful things about the Vested platform is that each of your recipients, each of the individuals that you're going to issue shares to, has their own portal. Okay, and in that portal they can see a summary of what they're going to get and what the conditions are around these, not just the 20 or 30 page EMI agreement as an example. Some noisy bike, sorry about that. So they can actually see what the reward opportunity for them is. They can also do what if scenarios. So here you can see somebody having seen how much they will get if the share price just stays at, let's say, the last investment round of £4.41, as you can see up at the top here. I can't show on the screen, but what they can also do in that bottom box down at the bottom is, you know, based on what the founders or the business is looking like, they can see what their reward would be if their shares get to £7, £8, £10.50, whatever. They can both feel vested and get vested in getting that number as high as possible. But the other piece of having that portal is them seeing what's already been accrued or what the value is to them, because, you know, here you can see that based on the current price that the founders are saying that the shares are at, you know, this person's going to be looking to get, you know, £40,000 post-tax in terms of a reward when the business sells. If somebody comes along to them halfway through this journey and offers them a new opportunity somewhere else, offering them maybe a £5,000 pay rise, £10,000 pay rise, this person will be able to see, well, you know, a £5,000 pay rise is literally £3,000 post-tax. Why would I leave this opportunity where I've got 40,000 post-tax coming over the horizon? Why would I leave? And actually I can contribute to the business to help make that even more than that 40k that we can see there now. So if you just move on to the next slide, just a reminder, you know, our whole raison d'etre is to help every business in the UK have a share scheme or an option scheme that allows everybody who's part of the team to have some stake in the enterprise, to be vested in its success and bring their capabilities, the best of their capabilities, to the table to help in that endeavour. As you'll see on Capterra or G2 Crowd, you know, we've got an absolutely stunning 5-star rating, and you know, I talked earlier about the opportunity for people to leave the platform as and when they wish after the initial minimum period of getting set up. We have a retention rate of about 99% month on month, so that hopefully talks to the quality of the platform and hopefully gives you an insight as to why you should maybe take a look. But aside from the vested platform, you should seriously take a look at share and share options as a way of both recruiting and retaining your employees. It's a very, very powerful tool. It's something that I benefited from the first day that I started work many years ago, but it's something that I wanted to make possible for every business in the UK, however small, and take the cost and complexity away from it. With that, I'll open up to any questions if there are any.
Okay, thank you. No, that's really informative. Thank you. Let's go to see if we've got any questions. Well, it's been really thorough. We don't have any questions that have come through as yet. So if you do have anything that's just quickly now, get something across. But that's really, really, really informative. Thank you.
Happy to have questions on anything, whether it's share schemes, share options, or indeed equity in general, if anybody has any.
So how long, so from my point of view, just a question is, how long would it take to sort of set it up with a business and get it going? What's involved?
Okay, so once you've decided to do it, you can have a free consultation with Vested as you're going through your thinking. But as soon as you're ready to go, it takes about 1 to 2 weeks for us to do your valuation, the valuation report, and the Val 231 for HMRC. That then goes across to HMRC. They will take 4 to 6 weeks to review and approve that. In that time, we will help you set up the scheme, both from at a company level, but then also for each individual. Being a platform, you can tailor each of the reward schedules or the vesting schedules for each of the individuals, or you can have something more generic. You can have things that are based on tenure, i.e. you stay with the business over the next year, over the next 3 years. That's the most simplest of vesting schedules. But you can also add in specific targets. Let's say if it's for a salesperson, you may have a sales target against which a certain number of shares will be available to them. And if they hit those targets, if they go lower, maybe a different number will be available. But we can literally tailor each scheme for each individual as well.
Okay, fascinating. That's really, really informative. Thank you. So let's just note other questions. So there's on this slide here is obviously if you've got any questions, you can email Mike at Vested. And do you want to just explain more about that free consultation?
Yeah, so the free consultation is for anybody who thinks and buys into the whole notion of the ownership effect, or even if they're just looking at it from a purely commercial perspective, looking at holding on to their employees and recruiting employees. That whole piece, as I mentioned, about the somebody having a stake, having shares in the business, holds on to them. So we will be, whatever the situation, whichever reason you're wanting to set up the scheme, we will talk you through the options based on the nature of your business, the number of employees, which routes might be best for you. You know, some of the people might be employees, some of them might be advisors or NEDs, for instance. Getting your non-executive directors vested in the business is also a really powerful tool, often done using unapproved options. But as you can see, there are lots of different ways of doing that at a very different reward to the individual. So we'll talk you through that. You can take a very quick call, 15 minutes through to 45 minutes, to help you understand what the next steps are if you choose to go down it. There's no obligation. It's literally, we want to broaden the understanding of share schemes. And I think once people realize what it can do for their teams, getting them vested in the organization, it's a relatively easy conversation to then take it beyond that.
It sounds a really powerful retention tool.
I believe so, definitely.
Thank you. So that brings us towards the end of our webinar, but we before we go, we just want to run our final poll, and it's really just to see if you'd like us to follow up with you after today's event. And it could be on anything. It could be our HR services and the training, our knowledge base, further information from Vested. Please do let us know, because we can make sure that they follow up with you after today's event, or health and safety services that we offer as well. So if I just launch the poll for it, Sue.
For you. Yep.
Thank you. Lovely, just keep it open for a little bit longer.
I think with that. Okay,
Yeah.
I'll close that for you.
I'll carry on.
All right,
Thank you. And just to, as usual, we just like to let you know of all our events that are just coming up. So on the screen here, you'll see our next webinar schedule. We've got one next week, all to do with writing legally compliant conduct allegations. So that's next Thursday. And then the following month, in keeping with the subject of disciplinary, then we're going to be talking about what makes fair dismissal. And then the month after that, obviously P&O Ferries has been in the news a lot. So we're going to think about what they got wrong. So that should be an interesting one too. And then in July and August, we're going to be looking at immigration, because there's been some developments around the rules and the visas coming into the UK. And then August focuses on trans equality at work, hopefully coinciding with our new policy that we're going to be launching too. So that's a list of all our upcoming webinars. So it does conclude our webinar today. If you do have any questions, either for us or Vested, then obviously these are our details here, and a copy of the slides will be sent out to everybody with the contact details of Ifty as well, and contact for Mike. So if you've got any questions for them on their share and show options, then please do get in touch. And as usual, we always like to have feedback at the end of all our webinars, so there'll be a short survey that sends out after today's event just to capture your feedback. So we would really appreciate it if you could complete this survey. And then it brings me to say thank you very much, Ifty, and talking us through the very interesting and powerful tool that is share and share options. It's fascinating and you know, really, really interesting, and I can really see how it can become a really good vital tool, especially with these challenges that businesses are facing with recruitment and retention. So I really appreciate the time that you've given to sort of share your information on that. It's really informative. Thank you. And thank you to everybody as well for attending. I know everybody's busy, so we really do appreciate it. And as I say, if you've got any questions, please do get in touch. And behind the scenes, thank you to everybody with supporting with the polls, questions, and making sure today's webinar has been able to take place. So thank you, everybody, and we hope to see you all soon on our next webinar. Thank you.